Hello, my friends. I am your host, Daniel Willcocks, and you're listening to episode number 24 of the Writer's Chair podcast. It is Tuesday, 16th of June, 2026, as I record this. And in today's show, I'm going to be talking to British horror author Jasper Bark about his new book, Harmed and Dangerous, his shift from author as freelancer to author as artist and trader, as well as his 100% effective method to conquer writer's block. So stick around for that. But before we get into that, here is my personal update. So, as always, I've got a few things going on, a few things in the pipeline that I will hit you with. The first one is, as of recording tonight, kicks off the Writer's Room, which I'm very, very excited about. So, over at danielwillcocks.com/the Writer's Room, you can join up to my live writing sprints, which are going to be happening every single Tuesday at 7 o'clock UK time until 8:30 UK time. And these are 90-minute sprints. If you've not listened to this before, these are 90-minute sessions in which I sit down with authors. There's a group of us all raring to get ready into our books. We dedicate some time, some spaces to sit down and work on the things we want to be working on. So they're led by myself. I introduce people into the room. We say hi. We have a little bit of a catch up. We then hit the clock and then we run into our writing sprints for 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how we feel. And then into a little break, another 20, 30 minutes of getting your words down on paper. And for me, I know that's something that's really been effective for myself over the years, is having that dedicated writing time, that writing space to get the words down. And again, for me, writing has always been quite a lonely endeavor. My first ever podcast that I ran solo was called The Great Writer Share back in, when was that? 2019 to 2021. And even in the intro to that, the intro was, the writing life can be lonely, but it doesn't have to be. And this is kind of the iteration of that. So I'm bringing this back for a couple of reasons. Number one, I want to get more time in to work on my books. Number two, I love sitting down and working with authors and speaking to other writers who are getting the work done. And number three, it's just proven, and I've done it time and time and again, where I've seen rooms of writers who are come together and you have that accountability just to sit down and get some words done. It's rare I write more than when I'm sitting down actually in a group with people and we're all working on the same thing. So I highly recommend, if you are listening to this, whether you are a brand new writer and you haven't written a word and you're thinking about getting into writing, whether you're someone that's been in it for a while and you're just a bit lonely, I think this is a perfect environment for you to come and check it out. And the good thing as well is I do offer a 2-week free trial for the room. So if you want to just come along, check it out, see if it works for you, then now's your chance. There's literally no downside. You sign up, as I say, over at danielwillcocks.com/the Writer's Room. Jump into the room. If you have any questions, feel free to message me and we can jump on board and chat beforehand. And then just get your words done and get one step closer to finishing your book. And there's something incredibly powerful in that. So that all kicks off tonight. I've already got a bunch of authors waiting to jump in and get involved. And I am very, very excited to see those faces. So yeah, exciting times. The other thing I've got going on, a few things. The other thing I've got going on, the hatching season is coming up to the end of its submission period. So the deadline for this anthology is the 28th of June. So as of recording, that is 12 days away. As of the time this episode goes out, I think it's like 10 days away, 9-10 days away. This is my charity anthology, raising proceeds, raising money for Mind, the mental health charity organization. Very, very close to my heart. There's a whole story about why I've chosen them over at devilsrockbooks.com/submissions. And we've had well over 100 submissions for this now. We're well into triple digits. We're getting more coming every day. It's very, very exciting seeing the increase, people ramping up, getting these stories in. There's going to be lots to pick from. And if you've not seen the cover is gorgeous. It's just like a really horrendous fly covered in blood and it's nice. But it's not exclusively for horror authors. So if you're a writer of dark fantasy, thriller, some kind of psychology, psycho, if you're a psycho, get your stories in, because as long as it's got a bit of a dark edge to it, as long as it takes that theme and really spins it, runs with it, works with the theme of infestation, hatching season and infestation anthology, then get your stories in. I want to see them. The word count is 2,000 to 5,000 word short stories. They can have been published elsewhere before, as long as you've got the rights to use them again. No AI stories at all, please. Get the hell out of here. And yeah, devilsrockbooks.com/submissions for that. And I'd love to see some of you listeners in this anthology. I also have been working very, very hard on, I've got a couple of books on the go at the minute. So hatching season's nice at this point, because at the minute I'm just advertising it and people are sending in their stories. So until I get to reading, until I get to editing, it's a little bit foot off the pedal on that one. But I am currently working on I mean, technically 3 books, all in various stages. This isn't like some kind of weird flex. Um, all in very different stages. I've got my I'm doing a second iteration of the self-publishing blueprint. I have now edited that and finished most of the edits. I am in formatting, updating, making it look all beautiful and wonderful in its brand new cover. That will soon be announced as to what the plan with that is. But for those who have read Self-Publishing Blueprint, this was my 2021 guidebook on how to self-publish your book. So it's not aimed at making money quick. It's not aimed at how to leverage AI to write things fast. The purpose of this book is for anyone who's thinking, I don't know what to do with my book, I don't know how to get published, it presents an option for you. So we know that the main options are find a publisher, find an agent, or self-publish your book. And there's a bunch of in-betweens. But finding an agent or a publisher is really, really difficult these days. Not impossible at all. I've got a lot of friends who have done it. But self-publishing, it gives you this book itself gives you all the cogs and all the mechanisms and all the steps of that process so that it can be a little less intimidating for you, which is kind of the purpose of this. I was coaching a lot of authors at the time who were complaining that they'd written their book and they just didn't know what to do next. And it was so overwhelming to think of marketing and cover design and formatting. And it's essentially a step-by-step list in a book that gives you resources and links and information so that you can kind of get this book, think, I want to do this, and then expand your knowledge in the places where you then know you need to expand your knowledge. So it's a really, really handy resource. I've got one of the old copies, or one of the new old copies in my hand right now. Don't know if you can hear that on the old microphone. It's got all the information in there on how to self-publish your book, all being updated. A lot has changed in 5 years, but I have added new links and new different pieces for everyone to know what happens in 2026 and to make the book much more future-proof, because it's more about the principles in there than the tools, although it does provide some tools that will help you as well. So absolutely check that out. And then I've also got a fiction work that I'll be working on in the writer's room tonight, which has been on my desk. I say on my desk. I went to an event in 2022, joked about this idea with some author friends, wrote it. This book was going to be the first book in the Twisted Tales series, and then it just wasn't because it was just wrong in tone. It went way too in a different direction. And yeah, tonight I'll be rereading this for the first time in about 2 years and cleaning it up and working on getting this across the finish line so that I can start to move on. I've got a lot of, as I've mentioned in the last few episodes, I've got a lot of sort of things that are half left finished. I'm just finishing, just getting done, getting over the line so I can move on to some new stuff, which I'm very, very, very excited about. And the only other thing that I've got going on is, not that that's not enough. The only other thing I've got going on is, as mentioned last week, I am working on a 7-day free course that anyone can download, work through, and get some benefit from. So the idea of this course, it's going to be a 7-day course. It's going to be an email course. Each day something gets emailed to you with videos and exercises and content. And it's essentially, I sat down, I looked at my body of work of nonfiction and thought a lot about all the different mindset tips and tricks and all the different things I've learned over the years that helped me get across the line to finish my first book. And so this is a amalgamation, a drip feeding of literally if I could narrow it down, my top lessons on things that I genuinely still use to this day that I think have had the most impact in what I've taught people who have now finished their books, that went from never having finished a book, and like myself, I was struggling for months, almost a year, trying to finish that first book, to finally getting something across the line. And now I'm 70 books in, 50 published short stories. So I've put these principles into action. So that's coming real soon. I've written all the content now. I need to do the filming and get everything set up. But I was hoping it'd be done for this week. It potentially won't be. It'll be done for next week. I'm more than sure. That's not the right way to put it. But suffice to say, I'm working on it. It's coming in the next few weeks. I'm very, very excited to get that out into the world. And I really hope that it will benefit some people and make a difference to authors' lives. And just help people finish their books, because I know personally how powerful it can be, no matter your goal, to finish that book for the first time. So yeah, lots in the pipeline at the minute. And now we'll go over to the interview with Jasper Bark. Jasper Bark is awesome. He is different in all the best ways. He came to my attention, and we go into this a little bit in the episode, but he came to my attention when I went to an event a few weeks ago where I stood by Dan Howarth's table. Dan Howarth, last week's guest, stood at his table while he was selling books, and there was just A man dressed as an Egyptian god by a table. And I was introduced to him for a mutual friend of ours. Got chatting to him. Very, very prolific man, writing some amazing books. I've read his new book and really, really, genuinely, really enjoyed it. There's a lot of New Orleans stuff going on. I won't say too much because I don't want to read the book, but it's really, really cool. So Jasper, there's a font of knowledge in this. I highly recommend you listen to this one. He's had a very storied life, and he shares, as I said earlier, his 100% effective method to conquering writer's block, and it's something that I highly agree with. So enough nattering. If you are ready, I am ready. Why don't you put up a chair, grab a notepad, and let's get into it. What's up, Jasper?
Hi, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited. Big fan of the show and raring to go.
Big fan. Oh, it's the second week in a row. It's nice that people like the show.
Atlantic, right at the beginning of an interview, so you don't ask us nasty things. Yeah.
And I haven't paid people to come on and say that either, so that's wonderful. Well, a little bit about Jasper. Jasper Bark is infectious and there's no known cure. If you're listening to this, then you're already at risk of contamination. The symptoms will begin to manifest any moment now. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no itching or unfortunate rashes, but you'll become obsessed with his books. From the award-winning collections Dead Air and Stuck on You and other prime cuts, to cult novels like The Final Cut and acclaimed graphic novels such as Bloodfellas and Beyond Lovecraft. And the book that we're here to discuss today, Jasper's brand new book, Harmed and Dangerous, which is book 8 of the Bark Bites horror series. Jasper, welcome again.
Thank you so much for having me on. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah, I love it because it's the authors that write those, so it's not actually me saying that. But at the same time, just to set context straight away for this interview, we met a few weeks ago back in Liverpool for the Indie Horror Chapter UK. I always get that name wrong. And so what you'll find, potentially people listening to this interview, is some of this might be informed by just us chatting and getting to know each other a bit more. Because one thing that I found about you there was we were introduced by our mutual friend, CC Adams, sort of towards the end of the event. You were walking around dressed as an
Egyptian god, Thoth, or Tutmosis, the Egyptian god of writing and magic, which I thought was kind of fitting.
Absolutely fitting. And of course, like, it captures attention, and it's very easy to go around to that event and say, have you seen that guy dressed as an Egyptian god? But just to start us off, what was the kind of inception of that idea, and how did you find that went down in the event circuit?
It's a sales tool. Effectively, you are in a large room full of desperate authors, all of whom have mortgages and bills to pay, all of whom hope that they can one day do that, selling their books. So everybody's doing one of two things. They're either clamoring for people to come to their table and buy from them, or they're hiding behind their books and doing the, well, I don't care.
There's actually more of those than you think there should be, but yeah.
Well, it kind of, that I've noticed that depends on the age group. That particular one, I had my youngest daughter with me, and she was fantastic for talking to Gen Zers, who millennials and above. I'm meaning no disrespect to any particular generation, and any generational observation is by its nature total bullshit. But and it is. But if we're going to talk bullshit and generalize, Gen Zers, having kind of come of age, unfortunately, in that terrible lockdown that we all had during COVID, don't do social interaction in the same way. So I spent time with various publishers on stalls at the beginning of my career, all of whom were American, all of whom were very brash, and they would shout at people from across the convention hall and like force them to come to their stand and sell to them. And while I don't quite adopt that thing, I've kind of changed that to a somewhat more British kind of stiff upper lipped approach. I do work on the basis that you have to get people's attention. So there's lots of things on my stand which are there for people to be drawn to the stand. I have got like a large head, like a bus with an exposed brain with pins sticking out of it. And if you pull a pin out, you win a prize instantaneously. So just talking to me, coming to my stall, you'll win something. These are lost leaders given away to lure people. And this is an unfortunate part of being an author in the early part of the 21st century, in that when I started as an author, and you could probably tell from my grey hairs, this is going back a few decades. Basically, I transitioned from being a freelance journalist, and I moved into needing to pay bills as a writer from the off. So you were like a freelance service provider. was the basic business model. And you made loads of contacts in the industry. You had a particular skill set that you needed to sell. You would negotiate a price, and if you made any royalties on any of your work, that was like a nice little bonus at the end of the year. It was a few £100. All the money came with the big money up front, and a lot of the contracts I signed were work for hire. As the decades have gone on, increasingly with the rise of the indie author and the democratization of the publishing process, their kind of business model has shifted from being like a freelance service provider, somebody who you'll find on Fiverr or any number of like freelance websites. You are offering their services to large corporations or small SMEs. Now, you are like an artisan trader, like those people that make like handmade dog collars or make their own jewelry, and they go around from various craft fairs, and they have a website. We have that, and on top of that, we have Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Kobo, and we sell our work through that. And an increasing amount of sales now come from the direct contact with people. So dressing up, having an interesting theatrical approach, and chatting to as many people as I possibly can is something I hugely enjoy doing anyway, and would probably do it for free. But two, it kind of it feeds into selling books, and I sold out of Harmed and Dangerous, that particular, and that was the most number of copies that I came with. So it works. It's a sales tactic. That's why I dressed up like an arse. And the unfortunate thing is people have seen a different outfit at most of these cons. So every time I return, I have to find something else and something more outrageous and outlandish. So it's in a cod piece, probably with one of those kind of like little tails that you poke up your rectum at the next time.
Wow, I look forward to seeing that one.
Making a rod for my own back, but there you go. Or, a rod for my own other parts.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you kind of touch on like a really, really good point there about being an Indian. There's a lot I want to dig into in that, but I feel like before I get carried away, tell people a little bit. You kind of teased a little bit, about your freelance journalism and stuff kind of in there. Tell us a little bit about your writing journey and how you got into the business of writing books.
I left school at 16. Ran away, couldn't find a circus, ended up actually working in theatre. These were days back when governments actually used to attempt to get people off the dole, not by like throwing them off the dole, but giving them alternatives. There was a thing called a YTS scheme. It was a youth training services, and I managed to blag a job at a theatre company training to be an actor and a playwright on the YTS scheme. And then there was something, a business enterprise scheme that they also ran. And from there, I moved into running a theatre cooperative with some of the people I'd met while I was on this YTS scheme. So it was, and then we got, back in those days, people would actually, government bodies would give money to artists to do artistic things that would improve people's life. I know. And so I spent many years like touring with the theatre companies, touring around tiny little village halls with an array of puppets and ludicrous scripts that I'd written, performing to like three old ladies, the village idiot, and a dog who'd just come in to shelter out of the rain. But in an old leaking transit van that constantly broke down. Following that, I became a stand-up and performance poet. I moved to London, and when I started to get like proper responsibilities and needed bills to pay and couldn't quite live on a hand-to-mouth existence, that came from that, I became a journalist, and that was through sheer absolute bullshit and bravado. Whenever I watch films like Catch Me If You Can about Frank Abdigali, or the talented Mr. Ripley about charming, charismatic individuals who bullshit their way into positions they shouldn't be in, I kind of get a flashback to the beginning of my career as a journalist, which was just pure bullshit and bravado. So I blagged my way into all kinds of positions, ended up in editorial positions and working as a film and music journalist. I also wrote about sex and sexuality quite a lot, and also for a brief while radical politics. And that was mainly because I could go and talk to people that other journalists weren't able to, because by and large journalists aren't particularly interesting, nice, socially skilled and adept people. And often tend to be very opinionated, quite sneery, and a lot of the people that they want to write about, from celebrities all the way down to people on the radical extremes of society, don't want to talk to them because they're not the sort of people to talk to. So I made a very nice niche for myself doing that for many, many years. Got to was introduced to and got to interview lots of very famous people, rock stars and film stars, for many years. But I was kind of, I felt I was on the wrong side of the microphone. I could have conversations with them as a fellow creative individual, and I wouldn't ask them the same five incredibly boring questions and just stare at them breathing through my mouth and like with a post nasal drip hitting my dictaphone. So for this reason, I got all kinds of interviews with people that were slightly above the kind of pay grade of the magazines I was working for. So I was able to work my way up to various magazines, but still I was like on the wrong side. So though I was making an incredibly good living by this point, and my wife was pregnant with my second child, I had managed to sell a novel, and I did say to my wife, I am going to quit all of this, and we're going to move to the country because we're living in London at the time, and I'm going to think beautiful thoughts and write novels, which looked great on paper. In practice, I would take like a huge amount of money out of our annual income. So I became a house husband who wrote on the side. In fact, my second or third day in the tiny little medieval town of Bradford on Avon, right in the heart of Wiltshire, I was pushing my youngest child in a pram and holding my eldest daughter's hand. As we walked down a road, she was about 4, my daughter was about 1.5, and this old lady was peering at me like intently.
Yeah.
And then as I kind of walked past her, she poked me and she went, "Here, are you one of these here house husbands?" The instant response was like, "No, I happen to actually to be a noted author and yeah, I guess I am." So I kind of had to earn my way out of domestic drudgery. My first novel, and the advance on that, had paid for the entire move out to the countryside, and that was all gone. So my next novel, which thankfully I sold relatively quickly, and in those days you didn't have to write it before you sold it. You could just sell it on a prayer and a promise and a bit of bullshit, which luckily I could back up. Most of the money for that went on the childcare necessary to look after my children so I could write it, really. So it was kind of, and I slowly built that up. And then my wife came to my rescue when, after about 10 years of doing this, I was having huge problems with a games company that I was writing scripts for. I'd done a lot of that, and it's the most soulless, destroying, terribly uncreative work you've ever done in your life. And this particular client was beyond stupid. And every single time you put something in the script to make sense of the moronic things they were talking about, they'd ask you to take it out. So nothing made any sense. And no matter how many times you explain this to them gently, politely, they'd still insist of shitting all over it. And I was kind of wrangling about this, and my wife said, "Well, why on earth are you doing this?" And I was like, "Well, this large pot of money that they're paying me to do this, and they've offered me like 4 other contracts, which will give another large pot of money." And she actually said, "I've never read anything that you've written that I could point to and say, this is just your voice. Anything you've written, I could say, only you could have written this," which was kind of like a knife to the heart. Like, thank you. But she was perfectly right. And we were speaking just before we began recording about the fact you've worked as a ghostwriter.
Yeah. Yep.
I know many novelists who do this, and one of the skills that you develop, and I was exactly the same, because a lot of the things I was writing were based on other people's franchises. I was writing comics for Saturday morning kids programs. I'd written novels based on existing film franchises for people like DreamWorks and also New Line Cinema. And I was basically replicating other people's ideas and other people's voices. So my wife was like perfectly right. So I kind of had like a long, dark night of the soul, or a long, dark night of the soul and too much whiskey, and then kind of thought, she's right. And again, because she's the most amazing woman and had already kind of moved out to the countryside to raise our kids in a nice country setting and put up with me quitting one well-paying job after actually getting the other job to begin to pay, she again went, just take the time off, write something, find your own voice, which is the most terrifying thing possibly I've ever done because um, trying to, well, who am I and what do I write and what do I read? What do I write about? Where in the whole commercial spectrum of publishing does my voice as it is fit? Um, and when I did find my voice, it was kind of two things really. On the one hand, it was highly imaginative. I've got a slightly near kind of hallucinogenic imagination I've had as a child. Writing is a little bit like for a mind that's like racing slightly out of control. This might be apparent by the way I'm talking to you. A little bit kind of like raising like a male toddler or having like a small pup. You have to keep taking it out and running it off
Hmm.
and exhausting it. And that's kind of like what it's like having minds like ours. I imagine it's not much different for you, or a lot of the other writers watching this probably will nod their heads. Um, it's not just a place to put all the weird, dark, intrusive thoughts so that you can remain sane and happy. It's also just your mind's a bit too active. So you need to direct it, focus it, direct that energy, run it off. So my highly imaginative mind, quite bizarre, dark, intrusive thoughts. It kind of becomes apparent then that an inordinate of my favorite writers write horror. Um, my most successful novel to that point was called Way of the Barefoot Zombie, which is quite obviously in the horror genre. And that was the genre that that publishers were still interested in buying from me. So the two things kind of like fell into place. It was like, oh, I've always liked horror. I've always loved horror comics. I've always really read horror. Actually, if I look all the way back to my earliest kind of prepubescent scribblings when at the age 12, I was convinced I was going to be an author. Um, it was like horror that I was writing. So that was kind of like a bizarre, like bolt at the blue, like, well, of course, I found my voice and it's hideous. It's horrible. But it's my voice. So that kind of takes us up to this point. And I've had was very, very lucky to become involved with Crystal Lake Publishing while they were almost like in a proto phase. Um, they brought up one anthology following Joe Meinhardt, the CEO, the editor, or EIC. I think he kind of has both roles. And when he published one book of his own stories, Lost in the Shadows, which is a superb book. And then he brought out For the Night is Dark and asked me to contribute. And he lives over in South Africa. My wife grew up in South Africa. Her parents were missionaries who worked for peace and reconciliation. They worked with the ANC as well as the South African government of people like De Berta. And they had to leave the country when she was only 15, like flee because the state of emergency was declared and they were suspect people. Um, but she'd fallen in love with the country and never wanted to leave and always wanted to go back. My brother and sister-in-law were running a mission school in the north of the country. So we went out for a visit and drove all the way down from the north to the south of the country. And we came quite near to Bloemfontein, where Joe lives. So I said, there's this guy, I've written a story for his anthology. We should go and see him. And I was the first, I'm probably to this day still the only author trek all the way out to go and see Joe. We hit it off, became really good friends, and I've developed a really good relationship. And as it happens, happens to be a bit of a genius. He's grown this huge empire, um, but also having worked for like really large mainstream publishers, like Hodder and Staunton, Macmillan, Walker Books, and tiny little independents. I've never been treated better. My work has never been treated with the care and attention it's given at Crystal Lake with any other publisher. So I landed on my feet there. And that probably takes us up to the present when I talked them into like giving me my own imprint, Bark by Horror.
There we go. Wow.
And I did this without using either sexual wiles or blackmail.
No.
Which is quite rare in the publishing industry. Anyone who's interested.
Well, one of the things I love about that is obviously you kind of harken there to the fact that, and I think it's a similar journey that most authors go on, but a lot of authors just kind of try to almost ignore or not admit that it's happening, which is this idea of finding your voice. And, as you say, we've discussed this, like I ghost wrote someone else's voice for years. I've made no secret to people on this podcast. When I started writing, I would literally have a Stephen King book next to me that I would be reading and being like, how did he, and it'd always be like, in my first few books, I think it was in order was like King, Bradbury, Barker. And I'm not saying they're anyway as good as those authors, but it allowed me to kind of emulate and learn. And then obviously, you've had this journey where you've written for articles, for magazines and newspapers and things like that, which are in a very, very specific style that have to meet an editorial guideline, into writing a novel, into I need to now find my voice. Tell us a little bit more about what that kind of fear was like and how you kind of came about discovering what your voice is.
I think you almost have to do it by accident. Um, the fear is that you don't have a voice, I think, initially speaking. The problem is becoming, because I also worked as a copywriter for a lot of corporate clients. So um, there is a sense, I think there's a quote from Fitzgerald. Now it's gone completely out of my head. It kind of, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it runs roughly on the lines with people saying,
You don't write because you want to say something, you write because you have something to say.
Thank you. That's exactly the quote. You don't write because you want to say something. You write because you have something to say. And it's transitioning from the wanting to say something and finding out what it is that you have to say. And there was also another quote. Lady Cynthia Asquith once asked Arthur Machen at a dinner party why he wrote such horrible Gothic fiction. And he said, "Madam, do you think I have a choice in what I write?" And often you don't. And so I think it's it kind of like finding that still quiet voice within. And that means kind of quieting all the expectations that you have, all the anxieties about being accepted by the market, finding an audience for your work, looking at what your peers are doing and how they're being successful in that, and thinking about what you want to say yourself. Um, so that all feeds in, and that the frightening thing there is what if I listen to my still quiet voice and it just burbles, or sits there kind of going, blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's my still quiet voice. It's a gibbering idiot. Thank you.
Yours is too.
and mine is, but you know what? It's quite charming. So to let it out and give it free rein. Off you go, darling. So I guess that is the fear. Do I have something to say? And if I do, what is it? And also there's also a fear in society anyway. We all have a lot of self-censorship. As a journalist and as an early author, I was censored many, many times. Um, I remember the very first time I appeared on television. It was in a kind of a local southeast station, and it was an event called The Pier. They were filming my act for 2 minutes at a club, and it was going to go out after the watershed at some ungodly hour, about 12 o'clock in the morning. And I sat down with these two researchers. This is the days when everyone had clipboards, before Blackberries and any kind of electronic device. And they said, now, you can't say anything political, you can't say anything about sex, and you can't swear, and no politics, definitely no politics. And I was like, dude, that's my entire act. That's all I talk about. I'm not going to say anything. And there was lots of horseplay on what I can and can't do, and I had to like stand there and perform a bunch of stuff for them so they could go, "Oh no, no, no! Could you just take out all the humor and the fun and the interest in that one?" And then eventually, I kind of said, "Well, why are you being like this? What's happening?" And they said, "Oh, we had this guy on one time. He said something terrible about Margaret Thatcher. It was awful, wasn't it? It was awfully terrible. And we got a whole deluge of complaints." I was saying, like, well, how many complaints did you get? And this is a show that has, even at that time of the night, like about 500,000 audience. Well, we had like 4 people wrote in. Yes, 4 people wrote in. So 4 people out of 500,000. I mean, that's point. No, 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 no. Whatever. I'm not going to do the math. Because I can't, obviously, under this kind of pressure. That tiny minutiae of invented, please go with me, add all the noughts you want to do with regards to a decimal point, can dictate to 500,000 people what they do and they don't see. And it was a weird form of and I came up against that many times as a journalist. I would, make a slightly, this type of remark that would even be blinked at often in other journals. And journalists would say, "Oh, you can't say that. Oh, no, you can't say that. What if somebody writes in?" And no one had written in, but there was a tremendous amount of self-censorship. But we don't often credit how much we internalize censorship, how much we crave acceptance, how much we fear the approbation of our peers. And This I'm talking about my early experiences were before the days of social media, where now even if you don't get internalized censorship from with the people that you're being published by or broadcast by, you can accidentally say something or be misunderstood to such a degree that you get a wall of abuse, which people are terrified about. So all these things build into the fear in saying, do I have something to say? What right do I have to say anything? Or can I get away with saying this? Or will I offend people or offend the wrong people by what I'm saying? Or will I be misunderstood? Those are all the fears surrounding about what is my voice. And of course, to find a unique and individual voice, often you have to challenge the prevailing consensus around what the particular genre you're working is, what the particular society you live in, its mores and its conventions and its culture does, and many other areas that can bring you a lot of negative feedback. I guess that's the worrying thing. And all you can do is silence that to the degree that you possibly can, and attempt to find your voice without necessarily out and out attacking or victimizing any other sections of society, particularly those that really don't deserve it. Which is not an easy act. You are kind of like gently hopping through a minefield with a blindfold on, but that's no reason you shouldn't do it or attempt to do it.
Yeah. I think, it was so as of recording, it is the Monday, the 8th of June. The Stoker Awards were the weekend that passed. And
Yeah.
just as a perfect sort of timing example of those, like a lot of the books that are doing well in that are brave books, are books that are challenging ideas and are looking at new ways of just viewing the things that we consider normal. And I think one thing that I always find really, really difficult is, I've authored, I've coached authors for the past sort of 5 or 6 years. And a lot of the people who are new to the page are kind of, I'm kind of considering writing a book and stuff. One of the first things they hear is like, well, I'm just, I'm just a mum, or I'm just this, or I've got not a whole lot to say. And trying to let people know that your unique worldview is the thing that is going to make the story whatever. And yeah, you have to go through the steps of learning how to write a book and learning how to emulate voices and learning sort of what, well, you have to try on a few hats before you know which hat you look good in. This one I haven't taken off in 8 years, but that's beside the point. But the idea being that, the whole point of a novel being called a novel is because it's a novel experience, and, everyone can lend a voice to the thing that they're writing. So it really shouldn't be, any kind of obstacle to just sit down and try to write.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. But that's one of the difficult things. It's also when people suffer from this completely imaginary, utterly invented concept of writer's block.
Yeah, yeah,
Look at
yes.
that writer's block. It does not exist. That does not mean you are having problems writing. It doesn't mean that there are things you need to overcome in order to write. But weirdly, the way to get around writer's block is to write.
Mm. Maybe not
No,
the press release.
and it's like, and if you're not writing, it's not because you've got some imaginary, illusory psycho. Because this term was actually invented by a Freudian psychoanalyst who put it down to potty training and a form of like internal sexual neuroses, which was blocking people. Gobshite and nonsense. Um, it really doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that there's all kinds of things which can hamper you in writing, all kinds of things which can act as a block. It's a form of performance anxiety, and you need to address the issues behind that, the things that are stopping you, and they'll manifest, and they may be even unique to you. Um, yeah, but um, you get around this by writing, and it's also in order to write, as you say, sit down and write. You need to sit down and write, and I find just writing anything actually begins to get you started, even if you're just sitting at the computer. Perhaps all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy is not, but I often start every novel. I open up a or any commission that I'm given, or any short story I'm asked to write. I sit there and just write, right, okay, what am I going to write about this story? I don't know. Do I have any
I do that.
ideas? And I just burble at myself for pages and pages and pages, and an idea begins to come out. And if I get blocked in a story or a novel and I really can't find my way around it, I go and open up a new document and just burble at myself. Okay, why am I so talentless? Well, that's a ridiculous thing. Don't say that yourself, Jasper. It's not because you're talentless. It's because of this. How many times you've said to people, well, what is it I've said to people? And then I just blurble, 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 blurble. So what is the problem with this story? Well, I think I'm doing this. Why is that? How would you get around this? And writing is the way to get around not writing. I know that sounds rather strange because you're thinking, I can't write. Write any old thing.
Mm-hmm.
That will begin your writing in the first place. And if you get blocked when you're writing, go back to writing. And effectively, you're taking the pressure off yourself because you start writing just as you might start burbling, and eventually it's like the ridiculous myth about if you gave X amount of chimpanzees X amount of typewriters, eventually just by sheer statistical luck, one of them would write the entire works of Shakespeare. I don't think that is the case, but that kind of is what happens in your own mind. If you just start writing anything, start with a laundry list if you want, or a shopping list, or a list of things you hate about a particular celebrity. Anything will get you going. Putting words down creatively will take the pressure off you that's giving you the performance anxiety and allow you to move into it. Writing is the way that you write. And even if it helps if you keep a routine and a schedule, if you try and write 5 times a week, even if it's only 5 minutes. I know everybody thinks they don't have the time to write. And believe me, when you write full time, you have less time to write than when you've got a full-time job. I know that makes no sense, but it's what it kind of feels like. Yeah. Time is always against every writer. Every writer wants a bit more time. But again, if you begin to break down your schedule, we waste so much time pointlessly scrolling through social media. Or any number of like tiny pointless activities which clutter up and fill our day. And if you just steal back 5, 10, 30 minutes from that and turn off. When people often ask me, you get this terrible thing asked in most interviews. People always ask you, what advice have you got for young writers, neophyte writers, writers who are starting out, your fellow writers? And I've seen a whole load of articles by starting out writers saying, oh my God, have you read the ridiculous things that these great writers say about writing? There's stupid things that great writers say. And all these tips, including these articles that I've read several of, are brilliant. They're absolute gold, but you don't realize how much gold they are until you've been writing for a very long time. So usually giving advice to writers is a bit pointless, but the one piece of advice that is very, very useful is the minute you begin to sit down and write, turn off the notifications on every single device you own. Turn them all off. Mm-hmm. Because your phone and every other electronic device that you work with, the sole purpose of it is to steal your time and attention. Time and attention are the 2 single most important resources that any writer has. So you didn't ask me that question. No, I preempted it. But if you want a piece of advice on top of how to get out of the performance anxiety, which causes this illusory thing called writer's block, the other thing to do is, stop all distractions. You won't stop distracting yourself because the minute you sit down to write, I've got this 30 minutes to write, suddenly the oven that you haven't actually got anywhere near will see the act of cleaning it out, getting your hands, putting a pair of rubber gloves and a mask and spraying chemicals will suddenly become incredibly attractive. God knows why. Your house will never be as hoovered as it ever has been the minute you start to sit and write a novel. You'll even do things like go through your tax return like 4 months before your accountant.
Well, I should check that email from 4 months ago. Yeah.
Yes. Oh gosh, I never read that book by, and on and on and on and on. Yeah. So you need to be also, hyper vigilant. It helps if you kind of create like a little sergeant major figure in your mind and have them shout at you every time. Oh, right. Come on, everybody. Back to the keyboard. Yeah, it's it. Eyes to the keyboard. Just keep nagging at yourself every time you do that.
Yeah, mine's called a deathbed Dan. I imagine my 80-year-old self, which, that's, maybe I'm understanding how long I live, but that's me looking back and being like, are you going to be annoyed at yourself and what you're doing in this moment? But it's also, you go.
I was just going to say how brilliant. I remember there was, decades ago, there was an advert with the then poet laureate, John Betjeman, being wheeled out in a wheelchair on a hillside. And they said to him, so, Sir John, do you have any regrets? And because he was a bit of an old curmudgeon, I wish I'd had more sex. Watching that as kind of like a very 20, 21-year-old boy going, oh my God, imagine getting his age and not having had enough sex. and very unfortunate thing. Now, having had a lifetime of too much debauchery, um, genuinely think that Deathbed Dan or Deathbed Jasper would not look back on my life and go, Jasper, why did you not take more drugs and have more sex? Um, it will be like, you fucking idiot. So Deathbed Dan is a brilliant one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Even
for sure.
better than Sergeant Major. But
Yeah,
better yet, yes, let's have like the Deathbed Sergeant Major.
perfect. Just hounding at you. It's also
Yeah.
interesting as well.
Pull
Like
up scythe.
you're also saying about, writer's block. I completely agree with everything to do with that. Like, I harp on about this a lot, and self-plug, there's a bit of this in my new book, but it's, writer's block for me, I feel it's just an excuse for you to say, oh, like you can allocate a lot of blame for other issues to this one mythical thing of writer's block. And like you say, there are other reasons, but isn't it interesting that no one ever has editor's block?
Or
Never thought about
plumber's
it.
block.
Or plumber's block.
You come on, does your plumber come on? Oh, I'd love to help you, but yeah, I'm not feeling it.
Which kind of brings me to a nice little point as well, because listening to some of your previous interviews in anticipation of our conversation, you mentioned about the fact that you hate the first draft, or maybe hate was too strong a word, but the first draft isn't the favorite part of your process, and that seems to be where a lot of writer's block in quotes comes from. So, what is your sort of aversion to the first draft? And you also mentioned in this interview that even though you don't like that bit, you can't not do it.
Yeah, you can't get around it. I guess the aversion is that you're not working at your peak capacity, and you have to accept that. Years ago, I interviewed Graham Linehan, who now has turned out to be a person who is very much out of favor for views that most people don't like. And at that point, he probably had those views, but it wasn't an issue. And I had a very good conversation with him. And I'm not, by the way, defending his views or supporting them in any way. But one of the things he did say to me was, when we were talking about this, was the first draft is just something you've got to get through. It's like wading up to your neck in shit, he said. And the shit is yours, and it's your stink.
It's the worst part.
Um, and it kind of is. And I think the thing people hate about it all is because you're not any good. And having worked as a performer professionally for decades as well, the difference between whenever you come off stage, you do play through your performance over and over and over in your mind, and you do tweak all the little things. You look at, I could have got a much bigger laugh on that line if I'd just done this, or if I'd just done that. That worked. That worked really, really well for the first time. I must keep doing that again. But one of the things you can't do is go back and actually redo that act, and then redo that act, and then redo that act to that audience is on their knees in front of you, worshipping you, saying you're amazing. But the joy of writing is that you can. And so in some ways you get almost kind of like slapdash because that great writing, great books aren't written, they're rewritten. Any number of people have said that. Hemingway's supposed to have said it at one point as well. But actually, which then leads me to another anecdote about Oscar Wilde, where upon he was sitting about with a whole lot of witty blades, and one of them came out with a particularly good bon mot, and he said, "Ew, I wish I'd said that." And some other witty blade said, "Don't worry, Oscar, you will." It's probably the same with Papa Hemingway, but anyway, the joy of rewriting is that you can go back and perfect yourself. You can go back and writing and rewriting. I mean, the first thing you do when you rewrite, and it becomes a joy. I remember having one conversation with a neophyte writer, and this particular writer also worked as an editor, and they said to me. I know I'm an editor, but the thing is, I hate having my own work edited because I think it loses something in the editing. And it was like, yeah, it does. It loses like the bad prose. It loses the scansion. It loses the stupid ideas. It loses the terrible sentences. It loses all the overwriting. Because it is a little bit like those scenes in things like Around the World in 80 Days, where they're in the large hot air balloon and they're heading towards a particularly like desperate mountain pass. And in order to actually get the balloon to get up and over the things, they have to throw everything out of the basket, including the dog and the kind of the gramophone that they've brought with them and all of their supplies. And they're desperately throwing things out of the basket. And eventually the balloon gets up and it goes over the Alps, and our protagonists survive. And it's writing for me. Well, when it comes to the editing and the rewriting that's a huge part. It's throwing out at least a third of every sentence that I write because it's utterly unnecessary. And the more you do it, the more this becomes, perhaps it's like it starts out being an act of self-immolation, like self-flagellation, but like every kind of flagellant who kind of gets too much into it, you discover it becomes the most enjoyable thing. And it's this sense that you can go back to an act that you've done and perfect it and perfect it and perfect it. So by the time you put it into the public hands, it is as close to the best you could do with the given deadline that you actually had. Yeah, and there is nothing more satisfying than sitting down to work on a 120,000 word manuscript and then have your second draft be 90,000 words. You look at, I actually threw away 30,000 unnecessary words. It's just like, it's like scoring a match winning goal. Not that I've ever known what that feels like, but it's the closest I come to feeling that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Thing is, there's so much. I can see a second conversation coming up at some point, Jasper, because there's a lot more I want to dig into.
Yeah.
We've already gone to places that I hadn't envisioned. There is one place I do want to get us to before we start narrowing down, which is obviously you have a brand new book, but before let's take a steep tailpipe. So, Harmed and Dangerous is the 8th book of the Bark Bites horror by Crystal Lake Publishing.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit. What is Bark Bites horror? Let's set that context first.
Bark Bites horror is like a laboratory. I have great difficulty not only writing the same book twice, but having spent years working in the fiction mines, hacking away the stuff, I kind of have sloughed off that kind of skin, if you like, and I don't want to repeat myself, and I don't want to necessarily repeat the same old tropes. So it's like a petri dish where the next set of horror tropes are being grown. It's a laboratory or a research and development lab, if you will, where the next ideas in horror are coming. Harm the Dangerous probably is my most conventional leaning novel. It's nice that the large majority of reviews are still saying I've never seen anything quite like this, but a lot of my kind of constant readers are going, well, this is perhaps the most conventional thing that's been in there. But it's horror for those with a jaded palate, horror for those that think, because any genre has a limited number of tropes and it has a limited number of plot lines, or it doesn't necessarily have to have, but due to the economic constraints of many, many publishers, they feel that if something works, we need to keep publishing a lot of that. So if you read widely within the genre, you read a lot of the same ideas, sometimes done brilliantly, sometimes done mediocrely, but you might get a bit of a jaded palate. And a lot of readers, particularly according to my publisher, come to them saying, I've kind of read everything in horror. What's next? This is what Bark Bites horror is there for. It's horror that's been regened, retooled. It's horror 2.0. These are the things that are going to be terrifying you in the decades to come. And this is your chance to get in on the ground floor and read them now. Now, I know that is like, and basically I've just reached into my kind of like trousers and pulled out a huge, massive, sweaty pair of like testicles. It's like, how dare you say this? How have you got the balls to say something like this? To which I would say, please put me to the test. Please buy these books. And if they are like everything else you've ever read before, then I'll give you your money back. And I'm a starving artist offering to give you my money back because I know full well you won't have read anything quite like this before. I have got such sights to show you, to quote Mr. Pinhead, as you won't have seen them before. This, of course, means that it's not quite for everyone because everybody, sometimes we do just want a McDonald's meal. We want the same old thing that we've always tasted. And that's totally fine. We all have that thing. But for those days when you want to read something new, you want to be excited again, you want the old thrills that you had the very first time you picked up your first paperback original and it scared the hell out of you. And you thought, where has this been all my life? I've never read anything like this. If you want to revisit that, come and read Bark Bites Horror. Any one of the books in the series, and I promise you, you won't have read anything quite like them before, and you will get very excited. So excited you might have to mop down the pages afterwards.
That's why the covers are laminated. But interestingly, I will vouch for that because this is my first one of yours that I've read. So Harmed and Dangerous being the new book, which I I was talking to my partner about it as I was reading it because, and as you were saying that, the way that I would kind of deconstruct this book to me felt like a hard candy with like, and I mean this in a good way, with too many layers. So so you start off with like one flavor, and obviously as you suck it, then the next flavor comes. I'm like, oh, okay, I was expecting that, but the next one comes like that. And then you get to a point where it's like, they can't still be flavors. And then another flavor comes. You're like, okay, because I got 50% of the way through the book. And I turned around to my partner and I was like, I feel like in a lot of other books, this book would be done. And I'll try and, encode without giving too much away for readers. Because I'm going to ask you to kind of pitch what the book is next. But the conclusion of her discovery of her arc kind of resolves around the midpoint. And then there's just more. And then there's more. And you realize that there's like all these hidden parts of the story that are just coming out of different cupboard doors. And by the end of it, I was like, it did take me in a lot of different places that, particularly from the outset, I didn't expect. And sometimes with a book, you can get to the end and that can feel like you've been cheated in a way, in that, there was no sort of setup for this. Like, I won't say which book it is, but I've had that recently. But this was like, oh, you've hidden all these little plots as you go along and the doors just keep opening. And by the end of it, I was like, there are some fantastic ideas in there. You speak in previous interviews about the fact you're blending subgenres. So there's a lot of that in there, but it still feels like a wholesome, easily accessible horror read. So that's my analysis.
Yeah, that's a very lovely thing for you to say, and I greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Very, very welcome. So what is the book about? What's the kind of hook that people might want to read?
It's a Southern Gothic paranormal thriller that deals with LGBTQIA issues and also looks at father-daughter relationships. It revolves around a 17-year-old girl called Kyra, who is struggling with a lot of mental health issues, most of them arising out of the fact that she was adopted. When she discovers, she's also a huge true crime fan, and she's massively into serial killers. And while many people grew up with like K-pop stars on the wall or pictures of My Little Pony, she had Ed Gein and Jeffrey Dahmer on her wall. And her favorite serial killer is a little known indie serial killer, a bad boy that's quite obscure and no one's heard about, called Billy Ray Johnson. Most of her, as I said, her mental health issues arise out of the fact that she was adopted at a very, very young age. She's now searching for her birth parents, but even though her adopted father is a lawyer, they're meeting dead ends at every turn. And she feels like if she could just find out who her parents were, she could resolve a lot of the issues that she's going through. Then she discovers that her birth mother was, in fact, the last victim of her favorite serial killer, Billy Ray Johnson. And she was born in the small town of Yeovil, which is right down in the deep south, in the middle of Bayou country in Louisiana. Precious come to a head at home, and she runs off to Yeovil in search of herself. And while she's in Yeovil, she begins to undergo a series of strange episodes. Her vision completely disappears. And when it returns, she realizes she's seeing the world around her as it was 15 years ago. Physically, she's still in the present. Everything she feels and hears is what's happening right now. But everything she's seeing is the world exactly as it was 15 years ago to that moment on that spot. And she's forced to walk in a certain direction and see certain things. And she's very, very confused as to what's happening initially. So she walks past a window and catches sight of her reflection and realizes she's seeing out of the eyes of the serial killer, Billy Ray Johnson. And that moment, he's stalking a young mother and a tiny toddler in a stroller. Whereupon she realizes that she's being forced to see through the eyes of the serial killer as he stalks her mother and her as an infant. And there is nothing she can do to stop him while she's forced to watch him stalk and then probably kill her mother. And she can't stop him because he died more than a decade ago by lethal injection. And as you say, that is just the launching pad. It is just the beginning. It will go to many other places that you won't expect. But that's the kind of basic hook of the novel.
So I'm going to ask the very, very vanilla question, which I'm sure you've also practiced at this point. Where did this kind of melting pot of ideas come from? Have you visited that part of the world before? Was that kind of an influence for you? Or are you like me, who likes to write about other parts of the world because I'm bored of the UK?
I Yeah, I like to write about other parts of the world. I love Southern Gothic fiction from like writers like Eudora Welty and Flannery O'Connor through to Donald Ray Pollock, William Gray, and Michael McDowell. I love that particular genre, and I love the literary side of it, and I love the kind of slightly more pulpy side of it. Utterly fascinated by that world. I've been fascinated with Louisiana for decades. And in fact, my eldest daughter did history and politics at Cambridge, and she wrote her dissertation on Louisiana politics. And that was partly because I got so fascinated with the history and the politics of Louisiana. I kept saying to her, "Read this. I think you found this absolutely fascinating," and she did. Uh, that's what, and but neither of us have actually, I have to confess, been to Louisiana. It's a place I'd love to visit. The political climate is such at the moment that tourism becomes a little more difficult, particularly in certain parts of that world. But that will change and that will pass, and I will eventually go there. And perhaps I can even put it as on my tax return as important research due to the novel that I wrote probably 5 or 6 years before I eventually visit. The genesis of the idea actually came. I was asked um, uh, back in 2010. I went to visit the DC offices, who published Batman and Superman back when they had an imprint called Vertigo, which they've just relaunched, which is where comics like Preacher and The Sandman and The Invisibles were launched. And I was asked by Shelley Bond, the editor there, to come in and pitch some ideas for her. The idea that she liked was inspired by this song by the Adverts, Looking Through Gary Gilmore's Eyes. And I thought, and this is big. That's because Gary Gilmore wanted to be executed by a firing squad and donated his eyeballs. And the idea behind the song was that somebody somewhere had got Gary Gilmore's eyeballs. And that went round and round in my head. And rather than focus on the eyeballs, that strangely in my kind of weird imagination became, well, what if you were looking, what if it was a weird time twist? If you were kind of looking 15 years in the past out of somebody else's eyeballs, and you had this weird time dislocation. So everything you saw was 15 years ago, but you were right here in the present. So the buildings would exist now that weren't there. You'd cross roads that would be empty at that point because that's what you were seeing. But right now it could be incredibly busy. It could be in extreme danger. And why would you be looking out of a serial killer's eyes? How weird. And that got caught up with, I'd wanted for ages because I've raised 2 daughters to adulthood. Particularly when I was like, and you must know this as a parent, kind of parenting and all your fears and anxieties about parenting, the dark side of parenting no one ever talks about, became a big theme in my work. And I realized I wanted to write a father-daughter relationship novel. I had this idea, and so I put the two things together, and I pitched them to Shelley Bond, and she really liked the idea. But unfortunately, this was kind of like just before Vertigo was about to hit its kind of publishing like iceberg. And she was about to go. And so we worked up the novel backwards and forwards for a little while. I was raring to write it. She lost her job at DC, and they weren't interested in my book anymore. It becomes what, in the publishing term, is it becomes an orphan book.
Yeah.
And you have to start again and pitch to other editors who want to come in with a clean slate and with their own ideas about what they want to do. And basically, the lights were already being turned off at Vertigo, and the whole of DC Comics was moving out of New York over to the West Coast. So, kind of my story like fell off. And I remember at some point pitching it to my 2 young teenage daughters. I always had this idea, and they loved it. And they said, "Dad, you have to write that. You have to write that." And this is one book I wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote. It went through a ridiculous number of drafts. And I think I published probably 4 other novels, and goodness knows how many novellas, short stories, and graphic novels over the course of time. I was continually coming back, sitting down and writing another draft of this novel. And it finally, 2010, I think it's when I began it as a graphic novel. 2026, it came out. That's a long gestation period, possibly long as the plot for a novel. And yeah, somewhere along the line, probably between the second to last and the last drafts, it actually became a good readable book. Up until that point, it needed a lot of work, and it got a lot of work. And thankfully, it's now in a form that I don't cringe when I hand it to people.
Which is always the end goal when you're writing a book.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you like Jasper in terms of listening to this interview, there are a lot of themes in this book that I said before we even started recording. You know, there's a lot of you in this, and knowing a little bit of you personally, I wouldn't say that like I know loads of you, but I very much enjoyed our conversations. But
Yeah.
one of the first things I said was, this is like, I could see you in these pages. And I think, you know, going back to speaking about voice and kind of the journey we got in this conversation, like, you can see the culmination of all these elements of your life coming together to where you are now. There's the fatherhood theme very much resonated with myself in reading those pages. And again, going back to our conversations, I'm like, that's Jasper. So if people really, really want to read this book, I highly recommend it to them. What one takeaway would you ask anyone who was thinking of reading this book for you?
One
Like, what's the one
takeaway.
thing you wanted to take away?
Um, I guess it's a book written for anyone whose father was in their life, at any point in their life, or who has a parent with whom they have a particularly close relationship, or someone who perhaps wants that and wants to explore what it might look like. It's also a book for anyone who's attempted to raise children and gone through all the manifest difficulties, and wants to explore those issues safely without any form of judgment. And the takeaway, that if your parents are still in your life, I'd like you, when you put it down, hopefully maybe wipe a tear away, pick up a phone and drop them a line, or give them a call and talk to them. And if your parents are in your life, then, and if you have children, call them. And if you don't have children or parents in life, call a loved one, and just let them know that you're there and you hugely appreciate them. And that might be a strange place to go in a horror novel, but it's an emotional journey, and it's interesting. I had a couple of friends, who one was a reader who became a friend, one was a friend who became a reader. Both of them have undergone uh, very big mental health challenges. They've both been sectioned. Both of them said to me, initially speaking, I'm not sure I could pick up a horror book, Jasper, given my current emotional state. And I was totally understanding, but said, you might find it to be quite a healing journey. And actually, both of them got in touch with me and said, how the hell did you do that? That was a gruesome, horrible horror novel. That was a totally healing, cathartic experience for me. Thank you. So this is horror that will heal, is what I would hope you'd also take away from it.
Yeah. I really hope any listeners listening to this episode and some of the previous ones before, because so far on this show, I've had primarily horror authors. I'm going to be dipping out into other genres and stuff again soon. But I'm really hoping to just dispel that kind of like horror is horrible and blah, 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 because there is always just this emotional nuggety core at the center of most horror books. Obviously there's your slashes and your gross and your blood splatters and all that kind of stuff, but generally, like a lot of horror that I read, it's just really, really human stories with a bit of gross like lensing and monsters.
I completely agree. It's there is that stupid phrase. I think it was Douglas E. Winter who coined it. Apologies to Douglas E. Winter for these things, but it is the stupidest phrase and the most horrible, pedantic idiots quote back to you. Well, hammer isn't a genre; it's an emotion. And actually, if you want to be hugely pedantic, horror isn't an emotion; it's a reaction. Big difference. But on the other hand, as well, like the key nugget, horror is a genre. Don't be foolish about this.
It's like romance.
Yeah, but like romance, and like porn, horror is a genre that's entirely based around a physical and emotional reaction to something. And this is the wonderful thing about it. And people read romance not just for like the spicy bits, and not just for the escapism. They read romance for an emotional journey that they want to go on. And horror is so close to that. You read really good horror for the emotional journey that you go on, and there will be a lot of emotions if it's well written horror. And it's a purging. It's a cathartic escape, and even the violence is like a way of releasing tension and bad feelings, and that is the purpose of horror as a genre. It's for those people perhaps who have too many emotions, and they need a place to kind of purge themselves of them, or to explore them in a safe environment where we can look at our negative emotions as well as our positive emotions, and get to the end and go, oh,
Yes.
Thank goodness I've been released of all that.
Yeah. There you go. So buy Jasper's book. Now, we are coming up to time. And I have our quick fire round that we're going to dive into. So just to set it up for people who haven't listened before, I'm going to throw 10 questions at you as quickly as I can. Answer them as quickly as you can. Just a little caveat, a lot of people don't answer them that quickly, but I think you're up for the challenge. So are you ready for me to throw 10 questions at
I'll
you?
do my absolute best.
Fantastic. Okay, question 1. Zombies or ghosts?
Zombies.
What was the first horror book that genuinely scared you?
Psycho by Robert Bloch.
Which is the better horror setting, Louisiana or the Caribbean?
Louisiana by a tiny, like, hair's breadth.
Tell us something about you that would surprise us.
I actually have 2 half brothers I've never met that may well have been in quite high positions in the Japanese Yakuza.
Wow, there you go. Surprising. What book changed how you think about storytelling?
So many have. Probably If on a Winter's Night, a Stranger by Italo Calvino, which is just a masterpiece.
Okay. Do you outline or do you fly blind when you write?
That depends entirely on the project. Usually I meet somewhere in the middle. It's always a good idea to maintain a certain amount of spontaneity for your story to surprise you. But the downfall that you can have is every single pantser I know who's honest about their flying by the seat of their pants is that they've had a project go right down the pan. It's stalled. They've never been able to rescue it. They don't know where it's going, or they get to the end and they just can't find a satisfying ending. That's when you have to fall back on plotting. Equally, if you plot way too much in advance, you lose all the spontaneity and the joy and the surprise out of your work, and it can just feel flat, like you're just rehearsing the same old, same old. So, but some projects want to be plotted, and other projects just want you to sit down and write them. Don't They're just desperate to get out there. They know what form and shape they're going to take, and they want you just to write them.
If Harmed and Dangerous was if Harmed and Dangerous was a restaurant dessert, what would it be?
It would probably be a Mississippi mud pie,
Oh, nice.
with, like, lots of kind of oozing, like, cherry compote, which looks a bit like blood.
Yes. Oh, perfect. If you had to only write in one medium for the rest of your life, what would you choose?
Well, horror's been very good to me, so I would probably stay in that. Forced out of horror, I would love to be able to write a crime novel. I read a lot of crime. For some reason, never had a good crime novel idea. I have endless ideas for horror novels.
Do you believe in magic?
Yes.
Final question. Are you actually infectious and who's working on the cure?
Unfortunately, it is terminal there, and it is absolutely incurable. And if were I to take my shirt off, you see just how infectious, and you probably never want to put me around to
Cut the
tea.
camera. And one bonus question from myself. Where can my listeners find out all about yourself and everything that you're working on?
Do check out www.jasperbark.com. They can also sign up to my mailing list. If you go to my website, scroll down to the bottom of the page, you get 4 free books from signing up that are completely exclusive. You won't get them anywhere else. And you'll get a relatively regular monthly update from me. Other than that, I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on x.com for my sins, and Threads as well, just off the top of my head. Come and hit me up there. I always follow back anyone who follows me, and I'm always very approachable and love chatting with people who are into similar things to me.
There you go. Perfect. And that is a wrap. So thank you so much, Jasper, for joining me this week on the Writer's Share podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, Daniel.
No worries. And to everyone listening, thank you for being here. If today's conversation sparked something inside of you, go and do something with it. That's the whole point. And if you want to go deeper, whether that's with your writing, your process, or actually finishing your book, head on over to danielwillcocks.com/writers. There's a growing list of resources for you over there. And until next time, my friends, write bravely and dream big. Thanks again, Jasper.
Thank you, Daniel.